No one remembers the names of the first ships that vanished. Only the silence they left behind. Fleets, erased, their signals cut short in the void, their final words swallowed by the endless dark. The galaxy thought it was a mystery, a tragedy, something to be studied and forgotten. But there was a pattern. Each fleet had one thing in common. Each fleet had dared to raise a weapon against humanity. We were small, they said, fragile, a species clinging to a pale blue world, wielding weapons crude compared to the Empire's fleets. They thought crushing us would be simple. They thought no one would remember. But the galaxy does remember, because every empire that struck at Earth, every fleet that crossed our path, vanished into fire and silence. And so the question spread like a shadow across the stars. What power hides behind those fragile humans? What spark do they carry that even the strongest cannot endure? Even now, the galaxy whispers a warning. No one survives fighting humanity. Before we dive into this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what comes next will change how you see humanity forever. The colony of Erevan 4 was not the kind of place heroes were born. It was quiet, unremarkable. Steel domes pressed against a barren horizon, oxygen scrubbers humming endlessly, children laughing in narrow corridors that always smelled faintly of rust. To the galaxy, Erevan was a speck of dust orbiting a pale sun. To the humans who lived there, it was home. Captain Mara Ilian knew every creak of the colony's walls. She had been a child when her parents first touched down. Their shuttle little more than a stripped freighter refitted for survival. She grew up with scraped knees from climbing oxygen conduits, with a voice hoarse from singing in recycled air. Now she wore the navy gray uniform of a defense officer. Not that there was much to defend. A handful of aging patrol ships, a militia barely large enough to call itself one. Yet still she served, because that was what humans did. They endured and they prepared. Her brother Jonas was different. A teacher, not a fighter. His days were spent telling wide-eyed children about Earth, the forests they had never seen, the oceans they could only imagine. He filled his classroom with hand-painted starscapes, teaching the young ones to dream beyond the dome. We are small, he would remind them, but never powerless. Remember that. Life on Erevan was fragile. A single breach in the dome meant disaster. A failed crop cycle could starve a family. But even in that fragility, there was laughter. Mara remembered the taste of synthetic coffee shared with friends, the sound of her brother's students singing old Earth songs, the flicker of hope in a place that, by all rights, should have crushed it. Humanity had always thrived in the cracks, but whispers had begun to reach even Erevan's dusty comm arrays. Whispers of fleets massing, of empires stirring, of alien arrogance sharpening its claws once again. The Varick Dominion had issued decrees. Across the border systems, humans were spreading too fast, taking worlds unfit for them, daring to expand beyond their station. The Dominion had crushed rebellions 10 times larger. They ruled by fear, and now their gaze had turned toward humanity. Mara noticed the signs and subtle things. Cargo shipments delayed without reason. Patrol ships reporting phantom contacts in the void. Her console flickering with encrypted warnings from distant colonies. And then, the silence. Entire settlements that no longer answered hails. She tried to hide the tension from Jonas, from the children, from anyone who might see the worry tightening her jaw. But at night, when the lights dimmed and the colony slept, she stood at the viewing port, staring at the stars, wondering which one would go dark next. Still, daily life pressed forward. Farmers patched the hydroponics units. Engineers cursed at overworked machines. Jonas kept teaching, kept reminding the children that hope was their inheritance. The colony laughed, worked, dreamed, because that is what humans did, even when shadows gathered. And somewhere, in the silence between the stars, something was moving closer. Before the storm breaks, take a second to like, subscribe, and share this story, because when the danger comes, you'll want to witness every moment. For weeks the warnings had been nothing more than static and rumor. Then the sky answered. They came like a shadow made of metal, swarms at first, then lines, then walls that blurred the stars. The Varick ships were not elegant. They were efficient and cruel. Their weapons did not simply punch holes in hulls. They unthreaded metal at a molecular patience, turned alloys to ash, left shell-like husks that drifted like tombstones. Communications died in minutes. Pilots watched their instruments go white, then black. No screams, only the brief, stunned silence of systems shutting down. Erevan 4's alert klaxons screamed. Mara barked orders the way a person tries to hold back a tide. Forceful, Insufficient, necessary. Get civilian bays sealed. Power to the shields now. Evac corridors A through D move. Her commands cut through panic like a blade. Men and women who had been farmers and teachers minutes before became hands on hinges. Voices on radios, bodies in line. Short sentences. Fast breaths. The colony swung from routine to survival in a single heartbeat. The first orbital batteries failed. The patrol ships, old, beloved, patched by stubborn people who would not let machines die, went up like candles. Jonas helped shepherd children toward the lower vaults, his hands trembling but steady. Keep moving. Remember the songs, he told them, because rituals mattered more than logic now. They clung to the old songs as if rhythm could ward off death. Human weapons answered with desperate ingenuity. Mines rigged to gravitational microbursts. Old freight containers turned into flak lattices. A hacked mining laser adapted into a makeshift pulse cannon. It bought time. It bought angry, bitter seconds. It did not win. The Varric responded with methods that felt personal. They targeted school domes first, not for tactical value, but for terror. Light fields over playgrounds went dark mid-laugh. Crops were steam-pressed into sterile statues. The Dominion left messages, holographic displays of conquered worlds, of populations erased for arrogance. They wanted to show what happened to those who reached too far. Fear burned through Erevan like fever. People hid under industrial stairwells, whispered prayers, and mouthed names, loved ones tucked away in memories. The colony doctors ran out of supplies. The engineers worked until their hands bled oil and sweat. Losses came in waves, and they were intimate. Mara lost her friend, Dennick, when a debris swarm collapsed the med hub roof. Jonas found a child in the evacuation line whose eyes were too old for his years. Each loss was a small personal apocalypse. The grief pressed against the dome like water, and yet anger replaced mere fear. It arrived slow, and then all at once, a furnace stoked by indignation. Citizens who had never held a rifle fashioned spears of metal and courage. Teachers became tacticians. Farmers learned gunnery. The colony's band of patched-together pilots began flying close, slingshotting through debris, diving into the Varric flanks to buy ground, then scraping their way back. Scarred and triumphant, they learned the Dominion's rhythm. They learned its arrogance. There were moments of ugly glory. A Varric skiff that had hovered like a predator over a nursery was baited into an ambush. Jonas and 3 others, using a jury-rigged flare array, lured it into an electronet. The skiff crashed in a bloom of light, a forbidden victory that tasted like copper and smoke. They cheered. They wept. For a breath, hope returned. Then the Dominion answered. They did not merely send more ships. They sent a thing that warped the air, a device that made sound into a weapon. It sang at a frequency that frayed the edges of the human nervous system. Sleep turned to convulsions, courage to nausea. Machines faltered. The device cut morale like a wedge. Entire platoons dropped from their stations. Hands over ears, eyes rolling into white. Mara watched good people fall and felt something archaic and furious ignite inside her. The colony's makeshift strategies were clever. The Dominion's cruelty was methodical. Cliffhanger. The colony tried to send an encrypted distress to the outer systems, one last plea to distant fleets. The message slipped into the void, a thin needle of sound. For a moment they waited for rescue. Days passed. Then the reply came, not in words, but in the shudder of an incoming strike that ripped the northern silos from their foundations. The outer world had lent no fleet. The galaxy's silence was not indifference, it was calculation. That silence hardened resolve into something very human, defiance. People stopped waiting to be saved. They stopped relying on miracles and started relying on one another. Mara organized civilian convoys into raiding parties. Jonas gathered volunteers to mount diversion runs, small, personal campaigns meant to sacrifice a little to save a lot. They learned to trust improvised science. A miner's map of a basalt cave became a choke point that swallowed a Varric boarding craft. An old violin bow was repurposed as a trigger for a thermal harpoon. The ingenuity bordered on the miraculous because it was fueled by grief and love. The tide turned in tone if not scope. Where once there had been a trembling edge, the fear of annihilation, the people found a new rhythm, anger carved into plan. They began to strike at supply lines, to sabotage comm relays and salvage what they could. Each small act of defiance was broadcast as an act of will. It spread like a contagion. Neighboring colonies, hearing the stories of Erevan's audacity, started to mimic the tactics. A flare here, a barricade there. A choir of teachers turned frontline coordinators whispering tactical instructions instead of lullabies. Still, the Varric kept pressing. Their forces were vast, their response precise. They cut off power grids one by one. They detonated vacuum charges to disable fortifications. They took hostages to force capitulation. Every victory cost more in blood. Each triumph tasted of salt and iron. Yet every time the Varric expected surrender, humanity instead tightened its fists. Cliffhanger into climax. One night, as the colony gathered in the hollowed ruins of the library, Mara received a transmission so brief that it might have been a glitch, an intercepted Varric command with coordinates, and a single line of text that read like a sentence carved from ice. Prepare for annihilation operation, Blackfire. Mara felt the room go still. Jonas's hand found hers and did not let go. They had a choice to make: hold and be ground beneath a calculated storm, or strike at the heart of what the Varric thought secure. Either path would require everything they had, and perhaps more than anyone could bear. If you were standing with Mara and Jonas, would you fight, flee, or bargain? Comment below and tell us what you'd do. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next part, because what happens next will decide the fate of more than just Erevan. The coordinates burned like fire across Mara's console. Blackfire. The Varric were coming not merely to conquer but to erase. It was their way of writing history with silence. Entire planets reduced to cinders so nothing remained but myth. Erevan would not be the first, but Mara swore it would be the last. The colony had no fleets left. No batteries left. No more illusions. All they had was themselves. She called everyone, farmers, teachers, engineers, elders, into the gutted library where the stars shone cold through a broken dome. She told them the truth. The Dominion means to burn us. If we fight as we are, we die. If we hide, we die. But if we strike first, if we burn with them, then maybe the galaxy remembers us not as victims, but as fire. Silence. Then Jonas stepped forward, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. We were never meant to survive forever, but we were meant to prove a point. Let the galaxy learn it the hard way. And so the plan was born. The Varric fleet arrived in a storm of black iron, engines rumbling like thunder across the void. Their command ship, towering, skeletal, bristling with weapons, anchored in orbit, ready to ignite Blackfire. Inside Erevan, humanity's last stand moved into place. They had only 3 old mining freighters patched together with faith and fury. Their hulls were stuffed with unstable fuel cells, plasma coils stripped from reactors, and anything that would burn hotter than the sun when ruptured. Suicide vessels turned into torches. Mara led the first. Jonas manned the second with a crew of volunteers who had never flown before. The third was filled with wounded who refused to die quietly. They called themselves the Spark. When the Varric dropped their bombardment rigs into orbit, the freighters launched. Engines shrieked, hulls groaned. Every warning light on the dashboards burned red. Yet the ships clawed upward, fueled by something stronger than technology: human defiance. The Varric dismissed them at first, small civilian craft, gnats against a titan. Their scanners barely registered them. But then the first freighter dove through the Dominion's vanguard, ramming a cruiser broadside. The impact tore metal apart. Fire roared through vacuum in defiance of physics, consuming the cruiser in a violent blossom. The Varric stuttered, confusion in their perfect machine of war. The second freighter, Jonas, cut close across the surface of the command ship. Its hull scraped sparks against the alien plating before detonating in a bloom of white light. The explosion tore open the belly of the behemoth, spilling its innards into space. Jonas was gone in an instant, but his fire carved a wound too deep to ignore. The Varric responded with fury, their weapons slashing through the void. Hundreds of humans died in seconds. Domes collapsed. The surface burned. And yet the third freighter, the Spark, slipped through the chaos like a ghost. Its pilot, bleeding and half-blind, guided the blazing coffin into the breach Jonas had left behind. With a final transmission, for every child who still dreams, they ignited the core. The Spark became a sun. The Varric command ship split apart, its superstructure folding into fire. Shockwaves rippled through their formation. Cruisers collided in panic. Destroyers vented atmosphere and spiraled downward. For a moment, the invincible Dominion faltered. Mara's ship was the last. She had not detonated, not yet. She saw the chaos, the fire, the possibility. Her freighter was crippled, engines coughing, but she angled toward the heart of the fleet. Her crew begged her to eject, to survive, but Mara shook her head. Humanity survives when someone pays the price. Today, that's me. Her voice went across every channel, open, unencrypted, raw. Across Erevan, across scattered colonies listening in silence, across the Dominion frequencies themselves. We are humanity. We are small. We are fragile. But we are not prey. You can break our bodies. You cannot break our fire. Remember us. Remember Erevan. Then she drove her freighter straight into the Dominion flagship's core reactor. The explosion was not a detonation, it was a birth. A star bloomed where Mara struck, and for a heartbeat the galaxy had two suns. When the light faded, the sky was broken. Half the Varick fleet lay in ruins, their flagship gone, their command shattered. The surviving ships retreated in disorder, not because they could not fight, but because they no longer understood what they were fighting. Against weapons they had been prepared. Against numbers they had been confident. Against fire this furious, this human, they faltered. Erevan was in ruins. Thousands were gone. The survivors crawled from wreckage, blinking against the light of burning skies. They had lost everything, and yet in their loss, they had won something eternal. The galaxy was watching. Smugglers whispered of Erevan's fire. Miners sang songs of Mara and Jonas. Colonies that had been silent now hummed with secret defiance. The Dominion had unleashed terror. Humanity had answered with legacy. And in the stillness after the storm, a single question lingered like smoke across the stars. If this is what humanity does when it is small and fragile, what will it do when it truly rises? If that moment gave you chills, hit like and share this story so more people witness humanity's fire. And subscribe because the fight is not over. The resolution will show what humanity left behind. When the fire faded and the wreckage drifted, silence returned to Erevan 4. It was not the silence of fear, nor the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a world holding its breath, alive when it should have been ashes. The colony lay in ruins. The domes were cracked, hydroponic towers shattered. The library where children once learned reduced to steel bones. Families were gone. Names were spoken into the dust and carried on the wind. Names that would never again answer. Humanity had paid the cost, and it was heavy, so heavy that for a moment, even survival felt like grief. And yet, amid the wreckage, people rose. Farmers sifted through soil to salvage seeds. Engineers bent broken girders into makeshift shelters. Children carried water where adults had fallen. Humanity did not kneel. It stitched itself together from blood and memory, as it always had. Across the galaxy, the story of Erevan spread faster than the Dominion censorship could contain it. Traders whispered of the sun that bloomed in the void. Soldiers in other systems hummed fragments of Mara's final words. Colonies under Dominion rule painted stars on their walls, tiny sparks of defiance in the dark. What had been a single world's tragedy became a legend. The Varick Dominion, for all its might, had been wounded in a way its fleets could not repair. For the first time in centuries, their enemies no longer feared them without question. For the first time, rebellion flickered at the edges of their empire. And at the center of it all was humanity, a species too small to matter, too fragile to endure, and yet impossible to erase. They had proven something the galaxy could never again deny. That human defiance was more dangerous than any fleet, more enduring than any empire. Jonas's students, the children who had sung Earth songs in recycled air, carried forward his last lesson. We are small, but never powerless. They carved it into the walls of their shelters. They whispered it before sleep. They grew up with it in their bones. Generations later, Erevan would be rebuilt, not as it had been, but greater. A shrine stood where the spark had launched. Its inscription simple, for every child who still dreams. Pilgrims came from across the stars to stand there, to remember the night humanity burned brighter than fear, and the galaxy remembered. Because that was the true victory of Erevan, not in ships destroyed or fleets scattered, but in the question it left behind, echoing through every corridor of power, every war room, every empire that had ever looked at Earth with disdain. If this is what humanity can do when it is fragile, cornered, and alone, what will happen when it rises united? When it carries its fire to the stars, not in desperation, but in strength? The Dominion had tried to erase a world. Instead, they had lit a beacon. And across the galaxy, in whispers and in roars, one truth became impossible to silence. No one survives fighting humanity. If this story left you with goosebumps, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because humanity's fire is only beginning to spread, and you won't want to miss the legends that come next.